3 women, 3 different states, 3 tragic endings that could have been prevented. Kadesha Burch, 31 years old, mother of 2 sons from Kentucky. She was shot and killed on December 27, 2024, inside her Springfield home. Her partner had previously strangled her, but she had defended herself with a firearm. The man who killed her had robbed a bank in Wisconsin, traveled to Kentucky with one purpose, to end her life. He also shot and wounded her mother, Jerriny Caples, 26 years old, from Memphis, Tennessee. On November 11, 2021, she was found slumped over in the back of her vehicle on Prince Avenue in the Nutbush neighborhood, shot and killed. 2 years later, her killer still walks free. Police have surveillance video of a suspect, but justice remains elusive. Krystal Evans, 44 years old, a Georgia mother. She was gunned down outside the Spalding County Courthouse just minutes after being granted her divorce. Her ex-husband Tom Mallory shot her from his car window and sped off. She had written, "He's going to kill me," just 1 month before her death, but authorities didn't take her concerns seriously. These aren't just statistics. These are daughters, mothers, sisters, women who sought help, who tried to escape, who followed the legal process. Yet the system failed them when they needed protection most. Today, we examine not just how they died, but why they had to die, and what their stories reveal about the deadly gaps in our domestic violence protection system. Stay tuned as we reveal everything about this case. Drop a comment, and let me know what you think about this story. Welcome to our channel. Please like this video, share and subscribe to this channel to help raise awareness and spread caution. Let's begin. Jerriny Caples, 26 years old.
Free who? Big Bo out!
Ain't no more free my dude, fuck.
Like, look at that pan today.
Take that shit off,
Give
Chris.
me mine.
Ain't no more free my nigga. Where you hoes was at? Where was y'all at?
And tonight, a family searching for answers 2 years after the homicide of Jerriny Caples. Our Zaria Oates sat down with the family about their search for the suspect and the grief they manage every day.
Please speak up for my sister, y'all. Please.
What happened to Jerriny Caples is something no family prepares for.
She was found in the back of the vehicle, slumped over on the driver's side. She had been shot once in the head.
A masked figure walks away from a white Jeep Cherokee, carrying a brown designer backpack. The doorbell camera captures every step, but the face remains hidden. Inside that car, Jerriny Caples sits motionless in the back seat, a single gunshot wound to her head. She was only 26 years old. 3 days. That's all it took for celebration to become tragedy. Just 72 hours earlier, Jerriny had been smiling, excited, full of hope. She had picked up her boyfriend from prison after waiting through his entire sentence. She stood by him when others walked away, believing in second chances and that love could conquer anything. On November 11, 2021, Memphis police found Jerriny's body on Prince Avenue. The young mother of 2 would never see her children grow up or get the happy ending she had dreamed about during those lonely nights of waiting. Her family was devastated. Her father, Jerry, couldn't understand how his loving daughter ended up dead. Her loved ones took to Facebook, pouring their hearts out in posts that revealed raw, heartbreaking pain. What happened in those 72 hours that turned a joyful reunion into murder? Who was that person walking away with the MCM backpack? And why did someone want Jerriny dead just days after she welcomed her man home?
Step out for show.
What's up, great?
Stepping out for show. What's up, Jay Great? Man, take that shit off. Look at Leah. Oh, man, y'all got her money with. She ain't fucking with me.
Everyone called her Jay. Born and raised in Memphis, Tennessee, she attended Hamilton Elementary, middle school, and high school, staying close to her neighborhood and the people who mattered most. Jerriny was a devoted mother of 2 children. Being a mom was everything to her. She worked tirelessly to give her kids a good life, even when circumstances got tough. Her children were her world, her driving force, her reason for getting up every morning. Her family was tight-knit. Her father, Jerry Caples, was her rock, raising a daughter who was kind, caring, and always put others first. Jerry would later say that Jerriny had a generous heart, maybe too generous for her own good. She was the type of person who would help anyone, even when it put her at risk. Jerriny had two sisters, Candace Parker and Lameshia Sims. The three sisters were close, sharing secrets and dreams while supporting each other through everything life threw their way. Her family described her as someone who don't bother nobody. She minded her own business, stayed out of drama, and wanted to live peacefully. When people argued, she calmed everyone down. When someone needed help, she was first to offer assistance. Those who knew her said she would give you her last dollar if you needed it, listen to your problems for hours without complaining, and stand by you when everyone else walked away. She saw the good in everyone, even when others couldn't. She believed people could change, believed in second chances, and believed that love could fix almost anything. This was the woman who decided to wait for her boyfriend while he was incarcerated, who believed their love story could have a happy ending, who thought picking him up would be the start of something beautiful. Jerriny Caples was a good person who deserved so much better than what happened to her. Love makes people do extraordinary things. For Jerriny, love meant waiting through expensive phone calls, visits behind thick glass windows, and lonely nights when her bed felt too empty. While most people would have walked away from a partner in prison, Jerriny made a different choice. She decided to stay, building a relationship on hope more than reality, surviving on promises and dreams instead of daily shared experiences. Every week, she drove to prison for visits, sitting across from him separated by glass, talking through phones that made voices sound distant and hollow. She told him about her day, the kids, how much she missed him. He told her how sorry he was, how much he loved her, how different things would be when he got out. The phone calls were expensive, but Jerriny didn't care about the cost. She put money on his books so he could call her, answering every time regardless of what she was doing. Her friends probably thought she was making a mistake. Her family probably worried about her choices. But Jerriny had made up her mind. She believed in second chances, that people could change, that her love could help him become a better man when he returned to society. While he was locked up, Jerriny lived like a single mom, but wasn't really single. She was committed to someone she could only see through prison glass. She turned down other men who asked her out, spent her free time writing letters and planning for a future that felt impossibly far away. Jerriny had dreams about their life together after his release. She thought about real dates instead of prison visits, him meeting her children properly, maybe becoming a father figure to them. She dreamed about a normal relationship where they could hold hands, go to movies, and build something real together. She saved money for his release day, planned what they would do first when he got out, and probably thought about their future. Maybe marriage, maybe more kids, maybe just happiness together. For months, possibly years, Jerriny held on to these dreams. She sacrificed her own happiness and freedom for someone behind bars, put her life on hold because she believed their love story would have a happy ending. When his release date finally came, Jerriny was ready. She had waited long enough, been loyal long enough, made enough sacrifices. Now it was time for their real life to begin. She had no idea that her loyalty would cost her everything. November 2021. The day Jerriny had been waiting for finally arrived. Her boyfriend was getting out of prison, and she was going to be there to pick him up. Jerriny probably couldn't sleep the night before. She had waited so long for this moment. All those visits behind glass, expensive phone calls, and lonely nights were finally over. She was about to get her man back. She got dressed that morning, probably picking out something special. She wanted to look good for him, wanted this day to be perfect. This was supposed to be the beginning of their real life together. The drive to the prison must have felt different than all the previous times. Instead of going for a visit that would end in goodbye, she was going to bring him home. Her heart was probably racing with excitement and nervous energy. When she saw him walk out those prison doors, it must have felt like a dream come true. No more glass between them. No more time limits on conversations. No more guards watching every move. He was free, and they were finally together.
Free who?
Talk your shit, Gray. Talk your shit.
Shut up.
Jerriny had played this moment in her head 1,000 times. She probably thought about how it would feel to hug him without anyone telling them to stop. Thought about all the things they would do together now that he was out. The celebration she had dreamed about was finally happening. They could go wherever they wanted, eat at a real restaurant instead of talking through prison phones, hold hands while walking down the street. They could be a normal couple at last. The first day after his release probably felt amazing. They were finally together, finally free to be a real couple. Jerriny had waited so long, and now it was happening. She probably felt like all her sacrifice had been worth it. But something was different. Prison changes people, and the pressures of re-entering society can be overwhelming. The man who walked out might not have been exactly the same person who went in. Maybe he had developed new problems, new stress patterns. Maybe the pressure of being free was harder than he expected. The adjustment period was more difficult than either of them anticipated. We don't know exactly what happened during these crucial hours, but tension was building. Something was going wrong. The fairy tale reunion that Jerriny had dreamed about wasn't turning out as planned. Maybe they argued about something significant. Maybe he was struggling to adjust to life outside prison walls. Maybe there were issues that Jerriny didn't see coming. The details of those conversations will probably never be known, but conflict was growing. By the third day, whatever was happening between them had reached a breaking point. The love story that Jerriny had believed in for so long was about to become a nightmare. November 11th, 2021, 6 p.m. Someone made a 911 call that would change everything for the Caples family forever. There's a woman in a car, and I think she's dead. The call came from Print Avenue in the Nutbush neighborhood of Memphis, a community where people knew each other, where neighbors looked out for each other, where kids played in the streets. It was the kind of place where something like this wasn't supposed to happen. When Memphis police arrived, they found a white Jeep Cherokee sitting in a driveway. From the outside, it might have looked like someone was taking a nap in their car. But as officers got closer, they realized this was much worse. Inside the vehicle, they found Jerriny Caples slumped over in the back seat, not the driver's seat. This detail was crucial because it meant she probably wasn't driving when she was killed. Someone had either moved her body or forced her into the back of the car. Jerriny had been shot once in the head. One bullet had ended the life of a 26-year-old mother who had so much to live for. The woman who had waited years for her boyfriend to come home from prison was now dead, just 3 days after his release. Police immediately secured the area and began their investigation. They called for backup, crime scene technicians, and the coroner. Print Avenue, quiet just minutes before, was now filled with flashing lights and police cars. The officers who responded had seen terrible things in Memphis, but this case hit differently. Jerriny looked so young, so peaceful, like she was just sleeping. But the reality was much darker. Detectives started asking questions immediately. Who was Jerriny? Why was she in this neighborhood? Who would want to hurt her? When was the last time anyone saw her alive? Just days ago, Jerriny had been excited about her boyfriend coming home. Now she was dead, and they didn't understand why. Crime scene technicians worked through the night, looking for any clue that might help them find Jerriny's killer. They took photographs, collected evidence, and interviewed anyone who might have seen something relevant. But the most important piece of evidence was already waiting for them. A doorbell camera from a nearby house had captured something that would become crucial to the investigation. The doorbell camera footage became both the most important and most frustrating clue in Jerriny's case. Memphis police spent hours studying the video, watching it repeatedly, hoping to find something that would help identify the killer. The footage showed a person walking away from the driveway where Jerriny's body was found. But there was a significant problem. The person was wearing a mask that covered their entire face. This wasn't accidental. The killer had planned this, knowing there might be cameras around. So they made sure to hide their identity. But the person in the video was carrying something that caught investigators' attention. A brown MCM designer backpack. MCM is an expensive brand, and this particular backpack was very distinctive with a specific pattern and style that made it stand out. Police thought this backpack could be the key to solving the case. They released pictures of it to the public, hoping someone would recognize it. They contacted local stores to see if anyone had recently purchased an MCM backpack like this one. They checked social media to see if anyone had posted pictures wearing or carrying a similar bag. The problem was that the doorbell camera footage wasn't perfect. The video was blurry, and the lighting wasn't ideal. While they could see the backpack clearly, other details were hard to make out. They couldn't tell if the person was tall or short, male or female, young or old. Detectives tried to enhance the video using special computer programs, but it didn't help much. As weeks turned into months, the case started to grow cold. Police had interviewed dozens of people, but no one had seen anything useful. They had followed up on every tip that came in, but none led anywhere productive. The brown MCM backpack remained their best clue, but it wasn't enough. Thousands of people owned similar backpacks. Without being able to see the person's face or get other identifying information, the backpack alone couldn't solve the case. Detectives also looked into Jerriny's personal life. They talked to her family, friends, and people who knew her boyfriend. They tried to understand what might have happened in those 3 days after his release from prison. But everyone they talked to said the same thing. Jerriny was a good person who didn't have enemies. Police developed several theories about what might have happened. Maybe it was a robbery gone wrong. Maybe someone followed Jerriny to steal her car or purse. Maybe it was someone who knew about her boyfriend's release and targeted her for some reason. But without more evidence, these were just theories. The case was stuck, and detectives were running out of leads. The masked figure in the doorbell camera footage had committed what seemed like the perfect crime. They had killed Jerriny and walked away without leaving enough evidence to be caught. Jerriny Caples made a promise the day his daughter was murdered. "I won't rest until I find out who did this to my baby." And he meant it. While police struggled with blurry camera footage and dead-end leads, Jerry was conducting his own investigation. He walked through the Nutbush neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking questions. He talked to anyone who would listen, hoping someone had seen something that could help solve his daughter's case. Jerry wasn't a detective, but he was a father who had lost everything. His love for Jerriny gave him strength to keep going when the official investigation seemed to be stalling.
This video shows a suspect leaving the scene. 2 years later, the person still hasn't been identified.
The murder was picked up by a door cam, leaving the vehicle, so which kind of led me to believe that the person might stay somewhere in the area.
So he searches the area frequently, looking for any clues he can find. A tragedy no one can wrap their head around.
Candace Parker and Lameshia Sims, Jerriny's sisters, were fighting their own battle with grief. They had lost their sister, their friend, their family member who always tried to keep the peace. The pain was almost too much to handle. But instead of giving up, Candace and Lameshia decided to turn their pain into action. They started posting on social media about Jerriny's case, sharing her pictures, telling her story, and begging people come forward with information. The sisters organized vigils in Jerriny's memory, gathering with friends, family, and community members to light candles and remember the woman who had been taken from them too soon. These vigils weren't just about mourning. They were about keeping Jerriny's case in the public eye. The family also worked with local media to keep the story alive. They gave interviews to newspapers and TV stations, always with the same message. Someone knows who killed Jerriny, and they need to speak up. Money was tight for the family, but they scraped together what they could offer a reward for information. At first, it was a small amount, but as time went on and tips weren't coming in, they increased it to $4,000. $4,000 might not sound like much to some people, but for the Caples family, it represented real sacrifice. They were willing to give up money they needed for their own lives if it meant finding Jerriny's killer. The community started to rally around the family. People who had never met Jerriny began sharing her story on social media. Local businesses put up flyers with her picture and information about the reward. Church groups prayed for the family and for justice. Memphis Crime Stoppers also got involved, adding their own reward money to what the family had offered. They encouraged people to call in tips anonymously, hoping that someone who was afraid to talk to police directly might be willing to share what they knew. But as months turned into years, the tips slowed down. The media attention faded. Other crimes happened, and Jerriny's case got pushed to the back pages. Jerry, Candace, and Lameshia refused to let their loved one be forgotten. They continued posting on social media every few months, reminding people that Jerriny's killer was still out there. They attended community meetings, asking for help and support. The family's fight for justice became a full-time job that they never wanted. But they couldn't stop, because stopping would mean giving up on Jerriny. And they would never give up on her.
I just want justice for my sister. I can't sleep. I can't eat. Y'all, I need help. I need help.
If you know who killed Jerriny Caples, you're urged to call Crime Stoppers at 901-528-CASH. Your tip could help put a dangerous criminal behind bars and $2,000 cash in your pocket. Remember, all calls are confidential.
Jerriny's story teaches us difficult truths about love, loyalty, and the dangers that can come with both. When someone gets out of prison, everything changes. They're dealing with stress, pressure, and a world that has moved on without them. This can create tension and problems that didn't exist before. If you're in a relationship with someone going through a major life transition like this, watch for warning signs. Are they more angry than usual? Are they acting differently? Are they making you feel unsafe? The period right after someone gets out of prison is especially vulnerable. They might have developed new problems, new pressures, or new ways of thinking that developed while they were incarcerated. This doesn't mean everyone who gets out of prison is dangerous, but it does mean that relationships during this time need extra care and attention. Jerriny's case also shows us how important it is for communities to look out for each other. Someone in that neighborhood might have seen something that could help solve this case. Maybe they thought it wasn't important, or maybe they were scared to get involved. But speaking up could make the difference between a killer going free and a family getting justice. We also need to remember that families of victims need our support long after the news cameras go away. Jerry, Candace, and Lame Shia are still fighting for answers years later. They need people to keep sharing Jerriny's story, keep offering tips, and keep caring about what happened to her. Cold cases don't solve themselves. They need people who refuse to give up, families who keep fighting, communities that keep caring, and individuals who are willing to speak up if they know something. Jerriny believed in second chances, but she paid the ultimate price for that belief. Her story reminds us that while it's good to see the best in people, we also need to protect ourselves and watch for red flags. The most important lesson from Jerriny's story is this: every victim deserves justice, no matter how much time has passed. For years have passed since Jerriny Caples was found shot dead in that white Jeep Cherokee. For years of birthdays she'll never celebrate with her children, holidays her family has to get through without her, and a killer walking free. The case remains officially open with the Memphis Police Department. Detectives still work on it when new tips come in, but without fresh evidence, there's only so much they can do. The brown MCM backpack is still the best clue they have, and they're still hoping someone will recognize it. If you know anything about this case, anything at all, you can help. Memphis Crime Stoppers is still accepting tips at 901-528-CASH. You don't have to give your name or get involved beyond making a phone call. But that phone call could be the one that finally brings justice for Jerriny. Maybe you saw someone with a brown MCM backpack around that time. Maybe you heard someone talking about the case in a way that seemed suspicious. Maybe you know something about Jerriny's boyfriend or what happened in those 3 days after his release. Whatever it is, no matter how small it seems, it could be important. Jerriny's children are growing up without their mother. They're going to have questions about what happened to her. And right now, nobody has answers for them. These kids deserve to know that the person who took their mom away didn't get away with it. Jerry Caples is still fighting for his daughter. At his age, he shouldn't have to be walking through neighborhoods asking questions and begging for tips. But he won't stop because he can't stop. Jerriny was his baby, and he needs to know who took her away from him. Candace and Lame Shia are still posting on social media, still organizing vigils, still hoping that someone will finally speak up. They've turned their grief into a mission, but they shouldn't have to fight this battle alone. The person who killed Jerriny is still out there. They might have hurt someone else. They might hurt someone else. Every day this case goes unsolved is another day a dangerous person walks free in Memphis. Jerriny's legacy lives on through her children, but her story won't be complete until her killer is caught. She was more than just a victim. She was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a woman who believed in love even when it cost her everything. Her story reminds us that behind every crime statistic is a real person with real dreams that were cut short. We tell stories like Jerriny's because these victims deserve to have their stories told. They deserve to be remembered, and they deserve justice. The brown MCM backpack, the doorbell camera footage, and the 3 days between freedom and tragedy. These are the pieces of a puzzle that someone, somewhere, can help complete. Jerriny Caples believed in second chances, but she never got the chance to see if her faith was justified. Her family continues to fight for answers, and her community continues to hope that someone will finally speak up. Justice delayed is not justice denied. Not as long as people like Jerry, Candace, and Lameshire refuse to give up. Not as long as cases like this continue to be shared and discussed. Not as long as there are people willing to listen and act when they hear something that might help. If you have any information about Jerriny's case, please contact Memphis Crime Stoppers at 901-528-CASH. Your tip could be the key that finally brings justice to a family that has waited too long for answers. Krystal Evans, 44 years old. It's sad that I have to walk around, terrified for my life and my children's. I know if something happens to me, please know who did it. This man has said numerous times he's going to kill me. I am posting and trying to leave a paper trail. This man is extremely dangerous.
Morning calls for justice after a woman was shot and killed outside the Spalding County Courthouse. Krystal Evans and her ex-husband Tom Mallory were at the courthouse Friday afternoon for a hearing when Mallory allegedly shot Evans multiple times, killing her. He ran from police and eventually shot himself. Now we are learning more from Krystal's daughter, who says she had a restraining order against her father. Griffin Police confirms the couple had a history of domestic violence.
These weren't the words of someone being dramatic. These weren't empty threats posted in anger. These were the desperate pleas of Krystal Evans, a 44-year-old mother from Griffin, Georgia, who knew her life was in danger and was frantically trying to save herself through the very system that would ultimately fail her. On September 13th, 2024, just 2 days after finalizing her divorce and obtaining a permanent protective order against her ex-husband Tom Mallory, Krystal Evans was gunned down in her car outside the Spalding County Courthouse. The very place where she had sought legal protection became the site of her execution. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a sudden snap of anger. This was the culmination of documented threats, repeated warnings, and a system that ignored every red flag until it was too late. Have you ever felt like the system failed to protect someone you know? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This story will show you just how devastating those failures can be. What makes this case particularly devastating is that Krystal did everything right. She documented the threats. She called the authorities. She obtained legal protection. She even tried to create what she called a paper trail on social media, knowing that her words might be the only justice she'd ever receive. But protective orders are just pieces of paper, and pieces of paper can't stop bullets. Today, we're going to examine not just the tragic death of Krystal Evans, but the systematic failures that allowed a woman who saw her death coming to die exactly as she predicted. This is a story about a broken system, a grieving family's fight for justice, and the deadly consequences of not taking domestic violence seriously enough. Krystal Evans wasn't just another statistic. She was a mother, a businesswoman, and a fighter who refused to go quietly into the night. At 44 years old, she had built a life as a real estate entrepreneur in Griffin, Georgia, working hard to provide for her family and build a future free from the violence that had plagued her marriage. Those who knew Krystal describe her as someone who didn't back down from challenges. She was the type of person who, when faced with danger, didn't retreat. She fought back with documentation, legal action, and public appeals for help. This wasn't a woman who suffered in silence. Krystal's most vocal advocate would become her daughter, Precious, who watched her mother's desperate attempts to protect herself and her family. Precious saw firsthand how her mother tried to work within the system, following every recommended step for domestic violence victims. Get a protective order. Document everything. Call the authorities. Make it official. The divorce proceedings have been lengthy and contentious. Like many domestic violence situations, the legal separation didn't end the abuse. It escalated it. For abusers, Divorce represents a loss of control, and that loss of control often triggers the most dangerous period for victims. Krystal had finally reached the finish line. On September 11th, 2024, her divorce was finalized. Along with that legal freedom came a permanent protective order against Tom Mallory. For many domestic violence survivors, this moment represents hope, the belief that the legal system will now step in and provide protection they've been seeking. But Krystal had been around long enough to know that paper protection was enough. That's why she continued to document, continued to warn, and continued to ask for help right up until the day she was killed. Her final days were spent not celebrating her freedom, but preparing for what she seemed to know was coming. She made those Facebook posts not because she was being dramatic, but because she was creating evidence. She was building a case that would outlive her. The protective order should have been the end of her story, the happy ending where the system works and the victim finds safety. Instead, it became just another document in a file that would be marked homicide less than 48 hours later. Tom Mallory wasn't a stranger who snapped. He was a husband who had been escalating his abuse for years, creating a pattern of behavior that should have been impossible to ignore. The signs were all there, documented and reported. Yet somehow the system continued to treat each incident in isolation rather than recognizing the deadly pattern that was forming. The stalking had become relentless. Krystal's family would later describe a man who couldn't accept that his marriage was over, who saw his ex-wife's independence as a personal attack that needed to be punished. This wasn't love. This was possession turned lethal. Domestic violence experts know that the most dangerous time for a victim is when they try to leave. Statistics show that a woman's risk of being killed by her abuser increases by 500% when she leaves a relationship. Krystal wasn't just leaving. She was fighting back to the legal system, which made her even more dangerous in her abuser's mind. The threats weren't subtle. According to Krystal's own posts, Mallory had told her numerous times that he was going to kill her. These weren't angry words shouted in the heat of an argument. They were repeated promises of violence that created a climate of terror in Krystal's daily life. But the system seemed to treat each threat as an isolated incident rather than part of an escalating pattern. Each call to police was handled as a separate event. Each report was filed without full consideration of the bigger picture that was forming. Krystal knew she was in danger. That's why she took to social media, creating public posts that served as both pleas for help and evidence of the threats she was receiving. She wrote about being terrified for my life and my children's, words that should have triggered immediate, comprehensive protection. The day before her death, Krystal called the sheriff's department to report that Mallory was stalking her. This wasn't a general complaint. This was a specific report of current, active danger. She was telling law enforcement that her stalker was actively pursuing her, and she was afraid. According to family members, a family friend had asked court personnel to escort Krystal to her car after her hearing. This was an unusual request. Many courthouses have protocols for high-risk domestic violence cases. But somehow, this request was either not communicated properly or was ignored entirely. The red flags weren't just present. They were waving frantically. A woman with a fresh protective order, reporting active stalking by a man who had repeatedly threatened to kill her, should have triggered every available protection protocol. Instead, Krystal walked out of that courthouse alone, directly into the path of the man who had been waiting to kill her. September 13th, 2024, started like any other day for Krystal Evans, but would end with gunshots echoing across the parking lot of the Spalding County Courthouse. The very building where she had sought legal protection would become the site of her execution. Krystal had business at the courthouse that morning. Court hearings were routine for her now, part of the process of untangling her life from her abuser and trying to build legal barriers between them. She likely felt some sense of security being at the courthouse, surrounded by law enforcement and court personnel. But Tom Mallory had been watching. He had been waiting, and he had been planning. While Krystal was inside the courthouse, Mallory positioned himself in the parking lot. He sat in his vehicle, waiting for the woman he had promised to kill to emerge from the building. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a calculated ambush. When Krystal left the courthouse and got into her car, she probably felt that familiar sense of relief that comes with completing another legal hurdle. She was moving forward with her life, building distance between herself and her abuser through the legal system. But protective orders don't work in parking lots. And Tom Mallory had no intention of respecting any court's decision about his access to his ex-wife. The attack was swift and brutal. Multiple gunshots rang out as Mallory opened fire on Krystal while she sat in her car. The woman who had begged for protection, who had documented threats, who had followed every legal avenue available to her, was murdered within sight of the courthouse that was supposed to keep her safe. Mallory didn't stay to face the consequences of his actions. Instead, he fled the scene, leaving Krystal die in her car while he attempted to escape the justice he had just made inevitable. But police were already responding. The shooting had happened right outside a courthouse, in full view of security cameras and within earshot of law enforcement. A chase ensued as officers pursued the man who had just committed murder in broad daylight. The chase didn't last long. Faced with capture and the consequences of his actions, Mallory made one final decision. He turned the gun on himself, shooting himself in the head in what appeared to be an attempt to avoid facing justice for his crimes. What state or country are you watching from? Does your area have better protections for domestic violence victims? Let us know in the comments. The irony was devastating. Krystal, who had done everything right, was dead. Mallory, who had planned and executed her murder, was alive and receiving medical care. The system that had failed to protect her was now working to save the life of her killer. The most controversial aspect of the case centered around the alleged request for a security escort. According to Krystal's family, a family friend had specifically asked court personnel to escort Krystal to her car after her hearing. This type of request isn't unusual. Many courthouses have protocols for high-risk domestic violence cases where victims need protection while transitioning from a secure courthouse environment to the vulnerability of the parking lot. But law enforcement officials disputed this account. The sheriff publicly denied that any such request had been made directly to deputies. This created a he-said-she-said situation that highlighted a fundamental problem. There was no clear protocol for handling such requests and no clear chain of responsibility for ensuring high-risk victims received the protection they needed. The sheriff's public statements about the case were particularly troubling to Krystal's family and advocates. Rather than acknowledging the system's failures, officials characterized the situation as a toxic relationship that was difficult to police. This language suggested that the violence was somehow mutual or that Krystal bore some responsibility for her own death. But the evidence told a different story.
Precious says her mother was at the Spalding County Courthouse for a hearing connected to their separation Friday afternoon.
The judge did issue a warrant. Instead of the judge taking him in right then and there, the judge said that he could turn himself in Monday night.
In a lengthy Facebook post, Sheriff Daryl Dix says Krystal walked out of the courthouse to her car where Mallory met her, shooting her multiple times from the window. Mallory did not stop for police and eventually shot himself. He's alive, but Evans is not, which Precious believes could have been prevented.
My mom literally called the sheriff department the day before because he was stalking her, and they did nothing. Had they had someone walked out with her, like, her friend asked, she would still be here.
Dix denies this. He says surveillance video shows Krystal never asked for an escort. His office also confirms there have been several domestic violence calls to the Mallory household. Dix says sometimes the violence was mutual and there were no witnesses to identify the aggressor. Dix says, quote, "Do improvements need to be made to the law? Yes, they do. Maybe it wasn't a deputy or my agency that failed. Maybe it was the law itself. And since she can't get her mom back, Precious will honor her life by fighting for justice with no sympathy for her father."
Not once did you offer your condolences, sympathy, or anything for my mom. That post was to clean his face, to clear his name.
Precious says she's going back to the courthouse to rally for justice Wednesday and plans to hold a vigil for her mother on Thursday.
Yeah, such a heartbreaking story there, Teresa. Thank you.
Krystal had created what she called a paper trail of Tom Mallory's threats and stalking behavior. She had documented everything, called authorities multiple times, and obtained legal protection. She had done everything domestic violence experts recommend for victims trying to escape dangerous relationships. The protective order itself became a symbol of the system's failures. While the legal document prohibited Mallory from contacting or approaching Krystal, it offered no practical protection. There was no monitoring system to ensure compliance, no immediate response protocol if the order was violated, and no security measures to protect Krystal during high-risk situations like court appearances. Security footage from the courthouse would later become a point of contention. Officials pointed to video evidence to support their version of events, but the footage couldn't answer the fundamental question. Why was a woman who had repeatedly warned that her ex-husband was going to kill her allowed to walk unprotected into a parking lot where he was waiting to do exactly that? The case highlighted broader systemic issues in how domestic violence cases are handled. Too often, law enforcement treats each incident as isolated rather than recognizing patterns of escalating abuse. Threats are minimized, stalking is downplayed, and victims are left to navigate dangerous situations without adequate protection. Krystal's case wasn't unique in its outcome, but it was unique in how well documented her attempts to seek help had been. Her social media posts, her calls to law enforcement, her legal actions, all of it created an undeniable record of a woman who saw her death coming and desperately tried to prevent it. The community response was swift and angry. Residents of Griffin, Georgia, and advocates nationwide recognized that Krystal's death represented a failure of the entire system designed to protect domestic violence victims. The very fact that she had been killed steps away from the courthouse where she had sought protection became a symbol of how broken that system had become. In the wake of her mother's murder, Precious Evans became something her mother had never been able to be, a voice that couldn't be silenced. Where Krystal had been dismissed, ignored, and failed by the system, Precious demanded accountability with a fury that comes from watching your mother predict her own death and being powerless to prevent it. Precious didn't just grieve, she organized. She turned her pain into action, becoming a vocal advocate for changes that might prevent other families from experiencing what hers had endured. Her mission was clear: ensure that her mother's death meant something, that the system would be forced to confront its failures and make meaningful changes. The rallies and vigils that followed Krystal's death weren't just memorial services. They were calls to action. Precious and other supporters demanded accountability from law enforcement and the judiciary. They wanted answers about how a woman who had done everything right could still end up dead in a courthouse parking lot. The community response was overwhelming. People who had never met Krystal Evans were moved by her story and horrified by the system's failures. They recognized that what happened to Krystal could happen to anyone trying to escape domestic violence. The courthouse steps where people sought justice became the site of protests demanding that justice actually be served. Precious fought law enforcement's version of events with the same determination her mother had shown in trying to protect herself. She challenged the sheriff's characterization of her mother's relationship as toxic, pointing out that this language blamed the victim for her own murder. She demanded transparency about what had happened and what could have been done differently. The media attention that followed helped amplify Precious's message. Local news outlets picked up the story, then national media followed. The case became a symbol of domestic violence prevention failures, with Krystal's own words serving as haunting testimony to the inadequacy of current protections. But Precious wasn't content with just telling her mother's story. She was demanding systemic change. She called for stricter enforcement of protective orders, mandatory security escorts for high-risk individuals, and real accountability for law enforcement's failures. These weren't abstract policy proposals. They were concrete steps that might have saved her mother's life. The fight for justice became about more than just Krystal's case. It became about every domestic violence victim who had been failed by the system, every woman who had been told that protective order would keep her safe, every family that had lost someone to preventable violence. Precious's advocacy helped keep the case in the public eye even as the initial shock wore off. She understood that lasting change requires sustained pressure, that the system won't reform itself without being forced to confront its failures repeatedly and publicly. The battle for truth became particularly important as different narratives emerged about what had happened. While law enforcement tried to minimize their role in the tragedy, Precious and her supporters presented evidence of the system's failures. They showed how Krystal had repeatedly asked for help and been ignored, how her warnings had been dismissed, and how she had died exactly as she predicted. The case gained national attention not just because of its tragic outcome, but because of how clearly it illustrated the gap between what domestic violence victims are told will protect them and what actually happens when they need that protection. Krystal's story became a rallying cry for advocates who have been fighting these battles for years. The death of Krystal Evans forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about domestic violence protection in America. Her case strips away the comforting illusions we maintain about protective orders, law enforcement response, and the safety of our legal system. It shows us what happens when institutional failures meet deadly determination. The most devastating lesson from Krystal's story is that protective orders create a false sense of security. These legal documents are treated as solutions when they're actually just the beginning of what should be a comprehensive protection strategy. A piece of paper can't stop bullets, and a court order can't change the mind of someone determined to kill. Yet the system continues to treat protective orders as endpoints rather than starting points. Victims are told they've done everything they can, that they're now protected, when in reality, they may be more vulnerable than ever. The false security of legal protection can actually increase danger by making victims less vigilant about their safety. Krystal's case teaches us about the importance of recognizing patterns rather than treating incidents in isolation. Her ex-husband's behavior showed clear escalation. Threats became stalking, stalking became planning, and planning became murder. Each incident was documented, but the system failed to connect the dots and recognize the deadly pattern that was forming. The warning signs were all there: repeated threats to kill, stalking behavior, inability to accept the end of the relationship. These aren't just red flags. They're predictions of future violence that should trigger immediate, comprehensive intervention. Yet somehow, the system treated each incident as separate rather than part of an escalating campaign of terror. For domestic violence survivors watching this story, the message is both empowering and terrifying. Krystal did everything right, and she still died. But her death wasn't meaningless. It's exposed systemic failures that can now be addressed. Her voice, preserved in social media posts and court records, continues to advocate for changes that might save other lives. The lesson for communities is that domestic violence protection can't be left to law enforcement alone. Friends, family, employers, and neighbors all have roles to play in creating networks of support for victims. The system failed Krystal, but individual people could have made different choices that might have changed the outcome. For law enforcement and court personnel, Krystal's case provides a roadmap of what not to do. Her repeated requests for help should have triggered escalating levels of protection. Her documented fears should have been taken seriously. Her death should have been prevented by the very system she trusted to protect her. The cost of inaction isn't just individual tragedy. It's the erosion of trust in the institutions that are supposed to keep us safe. When people see that doing everything right still results in death, they lose faith in the system's ability to protect them. This creates a cycle where victims stop reporting, stop seeking help, and face their abusers alone. Krystal's story demands that we do better. It requires us to move beyond treating domestic violence as a private matter between two people and recognize it as a public safety issue that requires coordinated, comprehensive response. It forces us to acknowledge that current protections are inadequate and that victims deserve better than false promises of security. The changes needed aren't mysterious or complex. High-risk domestic violence cases need security escorts. Protective orders need enforcement mechanisms. Threats need to be taken seriously. Patterns need to be recognized and addressed before they escalate to murder. Most importantly, victims need to be believed. Krystal told everyone exactly what was going to happen to her, and she was right. The next time someone makes similar warnings, the system needs to listen and act decisively to prevent another preventable tragedy. This story shows why we can't stay silent about domestic violence. And if you know someone who might be in danger, don't wait for the system to act. Krystal Evans died because the system failed her, but her death doesn't have to be meaningless. If her story forces changes that save even one life, then her desperate attempts to create a paper trail will have served their purpose. She couldn't save herself, but her voice might still save others. The question isn't whether we can prevent all domestic violence deaths. It's whether we're willing to make the changes necessary to prevent the preventable ones. Krystal's case shows us exactly what those changes look like. Now we have to decide whether we're going to implement them or wait for the next tragedy to force our hand. Her daughter, Precious, continues to fight for justice, not just for her mother, but for every domestic violence victim who deserves better protection than a piece of paper and empty promises. That fight continues, and it needs all of us to succeed. Kadesha Burch, 31 years old.
On to our top news headlines. New this morning, we now know the name of the person charged in a Saturday night shooting in Mercer County. Kadesha Burch is charged with attempted murder and 5 counts of wanton endangerment after she allegedly shot a man at a home on Perryville Road in Harrodsburg. According to officers, a man found on scene was taken to a nearby hospital to treat non-life-threatening injuries. Burch is being held in the Boyle County Detention Center on a $50,000 bond.
4 days. That's all the time Kadesha Burch had to taste freedom before her life was brutally cut short. 4 days between walking out of jail on December 23rd, 2024, and becoming the victim of a murder so calculated that it would expose dangerous gaps in our justice system. This is a story of a 31-year-old mother from Springfield, Kentucky, whose desperate act of self-defense landed her behind bars while her abuser walked free. It's the story of a woman who fought to protect herself, only to discover that the system designed to serve justice had failed her completely. What you're about to hear isn't just another true crime story. It's a stark reminder of how quickly hope can turn to horror. Kadesha's final days were filled with Christmas joy and dreams of a fresh start. She had no idea that while she was planning her future, her past was plotting her destruction. By the end of this story, you'll understand why Kadesha's case has become a rallying cry for domestic violence reform. You'll discover the shocking details of how her killer funded his deadly mission and the terrifying lengths he went to ensure his plan would succeed.
A Milwaukee man is arrested in Kentucky after police there say he shot 2 women and killed one of them. That happened Friday morning, but as our Stephanie Quirk explains, the crimes he's accused of actually started Christmas Day right here in Milwaukee. Steph's here now in studio.
Yeah, Sam, 23-year-old Roosevelt Davis is in custody in Kentucky right now, charged with murder. But court documents say the guns he used in this shooting were bought with money stolen in Milwaukee.
Kadesha Burch was the kind of person who made everyone around her feel better. At 31, she had built a life centered around service to others and devotion to her 2 children. She was a devoted mother who put her children's needs above everything else. This was the woman Roosevelt Davis III encountered in early 2022. Davis, a former football player from Wisconsin, seemed charming at first. Like many abusers, he didn't reveal his true nature immediately. Instead, he drew her in with attention and affection.
Boom, boom. Oh, shit. Get it.
The early stages of their relationship appeared normal. Davis seemed supportive of Kadesha's goals and interested in being part of her life. But as their relationship progressed, subtle changes began to emerge. Davis started showing possessiveness that Kadesha initially mistook for love and protection. He wanted to know where she was at all times, who she was talking to, and what she was doing when they weren't together. The controlling behavior escalated slowly. What started as concern about her safety became demands about her schedule. What began as jokes about her independence became serious attempts to undermine her confidence. Davis was methodically breaking down the strong, independent woman he had initially been attracted to. When Kadesha became pregnant with Davis's child in 2023, the relationship took a darker turn. Pregnancy often marks a turning point in abusive relationships, as abusers recognize that their victims are now more vulnerable. For Davis, Kadesha's pregnancy became another tool of control. The birth of their child marked the beginning of the most dangerous phase of their relationship. Physical violence entered the relationship after the baby's arrival. Davis no longer bothered to hide his true nature. The violence wasn't random or impulsive. Davis used calculated intimidation tactics, threats, and their newborn child to maintain absolute control over Kadesha. For Kadesha, the realization that she was trapped in an abusive relationship was devastating. She had always been strong, independent, and capable of handling challenges. But Davis had systematically stripped away her confidence and isolated her from the people who could help her. The woman who had once been a pillar of strength in her community now found herself walking on eggshells in her own home, calculating every word and action to avoid triggering Davis's rage. She was living in constant fear, not just for herself but for her children. By October 2024, Kadesha Burch was living in constant terror. The man she had once trusted had become her greatest threat, and the violence in their relationship had escalated to life-threatening levels. Davis's control over her had become absolute, and his willingness to use physical force had reached a point where Kadesha genuinely feared for her life. The abuse had progressed beyond psychological manipulation. Davis was now regularly using physical intimidation and violence to maintain control. For Kadesha, the constant state of hypervigilance was exhausting. She had to anticipate Davis's moods, react to his demands, and protect her children from witnessing the worst of his behavior. The incident that would change everything happened in October 2024, during what Kadesha later described as one of the most terrifying moments of her life. According to her account, Davis escalated his violence to a level that made her believe she was about to die. During this confrontation, Davis allegedly strangled her, cutting off her ability to breathe and making her fear that she would never see her children again. In that moment of absolute terror, faced with what she believed was imminent death, Kadesha made a split-second decision that would alter her life forever. She shot Roosevelt Davis III, claiming self-defense against what she perceived as a lethal attack. For Kadesha, this wasn't a planned action or a moment of revenge. It was a desperate attempt to save her own life when she believed she had no other option.
Kadesha Burch is charged with attempted murder and 5 counts of wanton endangerment after she allegedly shot a man at a home on Perryville Road in Harrodsburg. According to officers, a man found on scene was taken to a nearby hospital to treat non-life-threatening injuries. Burch is being held in the Boyle County Detention Center on a $50,000 bond.
The aftermath of the shooting revealed cruel ironies that often plague domestic violence cases. While Kadesha had acted in what she believed was self-defense, the legal system's response would prove to be another form of victimization. Despite her claims of self-defense and the documented history of abuse, Kadesha found herself facing the full weight of criminal charges. The evidence of Davis's abusive behavior toward Kadesha was substantial. Davis, despite being shot and despite the allegations of abuse against him, remained free while Kadesha was arrested and charged with attempted murder. This reversal of roles, the victim becoming the defendant while the alleged abuser maintained his freedom, highlighted dangerous gaps in how the justice system handles domestic violence cases. The charges against Kadesha sent shockwaves through her community. People who knew her couldn't reconcile the woman they had known with someone who would commit attempted murder. But those closest to her understood that this was exactly the kind of impossible situation that domestic violence victims face when the system fails them. For Kadesha, being arrested and charged was devastating. The woman who had tried to save her own life was being punished for that act of self-preservation. While Kadesha sat in jail, processing trauma and preparing for her defense, Roosevelt Davis III was making his own preparations, plans that would prove far more dangerous than anyone could have expected. December 23rd, 2024, should have been one of the happiest days of Kadesha Burch's life in months. After spending weeks behind bars, facing the terrifying prospect of a lengthy prison sentence for defending herself, she was finally going home. Her family had worked tirelessly to raise a $10,000 bond, with her mother and members of her church contributing to secure her temporary freedom. The moment Kadesha walked out of jail, she was surrounded by the love and support she had been missing. Her children, who had been staying with family members, were overjoyed to have their mother back. For Kadesha, the feeling of freedom was overwhelming. After weeks of living in a cell, even the simple act of choosing what to wear felt like a luxury. But Kadesha's freedom came with conditions and ongoing stress. She still faced serious criminal charges, and her legal battle was far from over. Despite the legal challenges ahead, Kadesha began making plans for a fresh start. She had learned from her experience with Davis that staying in the same location where he could easily find her was dangerous. She started discussing relocation plans with her family, looking at options that would allow her to start over in a place where she and her children could feel safe. The Christmas season took on special meaning for Kadesha and her family. This was their first Christmas together in months, and they were determined to make it memorable. Kadesha threw herself into creating positive experiences for her children, who had been through so much upheaval. As Christmas Day approached, Kadesha felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. She was with her children. She had community support, and she had concrete plans for starting over. What Kadesha didn't know was that her hope was being watched from a distance. While she was planning her future, Roosevelt Davis III was making very different kinds of plans. While Kadesha Burch was celebrating Christmas with her family and planning for a hopeful future, Roosevelt Davis III was planning one of the most chilling murder plots imaginable. Davis's actions during this period revealed the calculated nature of his violence. This wasn't a crime of passion or spontaneous anger. Every step he took was deliberate, planned, and designed to ensure that his ultimate goal, killing Kadesha, would be achieved. The first phase of Davis's plan was shocking. He decided to rob a bank to fund his murder plot. Bank robbery is a federal crime that carries severe penalties, but Davis was willing to risk everything to get the money he needed for his deadly mission. This decision demonstrates the depth of his obsession with Kadesha and his complete disregard for consequences. The bank robbery was successful from Davis's perspective. He managed to steal a significant amount of money without being immediately caught, giving him the financial resources he needed. For Davis, this wasn't just about getting money. It was about taking the first concrete step toward ending Kadesha's life. With the stolen bank funds in hand, Davis immediately began shopping for the tools he would need to commit murder. His first purchases were 2 firearms, chosen specifically for their lethal capacity. The fact that he bought multiple weapons suggests that he was planning not just to kill Kadesha, but to be prepared for any resistance he might encounter. Once he had acquired his weapons and gear, Davis began the journey from Wisconsin to Kentucky. This wasn't a short trip made in anger. It was a long drive that gave him plenty of time to reconsider his actions and choose a different path. Instead, he used the travel time to finalize his plan and prepare mentally for what he was about to do. The fact that Davis knew where to find Kadesha is particularly troubling. Despite her efforts to start fresh and her family's attempts to keep her safe, he had somehow tracked her location. As Davis approached Kentucky, he was carrying stolen money, illegal weapons, and a plan to commit murder. By December 27, 2024, all of Davis's preparations were complete. December 27, 2024 began like any other day for Kadesha Burch and her family. She was staying at a house on Claybrook Avenue, surrounded by the people who loved her and wanted to keep her safe. The Christmas celebrations were still fresh in everyone's minds, and there was a sense of normalcy that had been missing from their lives for months. But Roosevelt Davis III had different plans for that day. After driving from Wisconsin with his stolen money, purchased weapons, and camouflage clothing, he had arrived in Springfield, Kentucky with one goal: to end Kadesha's life. His preparations were complete, his resolve was firm, and his opportunity had finally arrived. Davis approached the house on Claybrook Avenue with the tactical mindset he had been cultivating throughout his planning process. He was dressed in his camouflage clothing, armed with multiple weapons, and operating under the cover of darkness. This wasn't a confrontation or an argument that got out of hand. This was a planned assassination carried out by someone who had spent considerable time and resources preparing for this moment. The break-in itself was swift and violent. Davis forced his way into the house, where Kadesha and her family believed they were safe. The sense of security that had been so important to Kadesha's healing process was shattered in an instant. The home that should have been a refuge became a crime scene. Once inside the house, Davis moved quickly to locate his primary target. He wasn't there to steal anything or to make demands. He was there to kill Kadesha Burch, and nothing was going to stop him from achieving that goal. When Davis found Kadesha, he shot her multiple times. The woman who had survived his abuse fought back in self-defense, endured months in jail, and was finally beginning to rebuild her life, was killed in her own temporary sanctuary. But Davis's violence didn't stop with Kadesha. Another woman in the house was also shot during the attack. Unlike Kadesha, the second victim survived her injuries, but she became a witness to the calculated brutality that Davis had brought into their home. Her survival would later prove crucial to the investigation and prosecution of Davis's crimes. The attack was over quickly, but its impact was devastating and permanent. In a matter of minutes, Davis had destroyed the life that Kadesha had been trying so hard to rebuild. After the shooting, Davis fled the scene, but his escape was short-lived. Law enforcement agencies were quickly mobilized, and Davis was arrested before he could get far from the crime scene. The charges against Davis were swift and severe: murder, attempted murder, and burglary. The evidence against him was overwhelming, from the weapons found in his possession to the witness testimony of the surviving victim. The murder of Kadesha Burch sent shockwaves through Springfield, Kentucky, and beyond, but the tragedy was about more than just one woman's death. Her case became a stark illustration of how domestic violence victims can be failed by the very systems designed to protect them, and how these failures can have deadly consequences.
Day was a baby. I've eaten at the grandmother's table and the grandfather's. We got a long history together.
He described Day Day as a joyful person, as someone who was a light for others.
That she would help you and nobody would have to know. And so to be such a young person in her 30s, that's unusual, because today we want to blow our own horn.
The most glaring systemic failure in Kadesha's case was a reversal of victim and perpetrator roles in the legal system. When Kadesha shot Davis in what she claimed was self-defense, she became the one facing criminal charges, while her alleged abuser remained free. This reversal is unfortunately common in domestic violence cases. where victims who fight back are often treated more harshly than their abusers. The decision to charge Kadesha with attempted murder while allowing Davis to remain free created a dangerous situation that ultimately cost her life. While she was in jail, unable to protect herself or plan for her safety, Davis was free to plan his revenge. The system that should have been evaluating the threat he posed to her safety instead treated him as the victim of her violence. Legal experts who examined Kadesha's case pointed out that domestic violence situations require specialized understanding and training to handle properly. The dynamics of abusive relationships, the psychological impact of prolonged abuse, and the legitimate fear that drives victims to fight back are complex issues that require more than standard criminal justice responses. The failure to recognize Davis as a continuing danger to Kadesha had fatal consequences. The case also highlighted problems with how domestic violence victims are supported during legal proceedings. Kadesha was fighting not just for her freedom but for her life, yet she was navigating a system that seemed designed to work against her interests. The resources available to help domestic violence victims understand their legal options and protect themselves during court proceedings proved inadequate in her case. Mental health professionals who work with domestic violence victims pointed out that Kadesha's case illustrates why leaving an abusive relationship is often the most dangerous time for victims. Statistics show that domestic violence victims are at highest risk of being killed when they try to leave their abusers. Yet the support systems for victims during this critical period are often insufficient. What makes Kadesha's case particularly tragic is that it was preventable. If the system had properly recognized the threat Davis posed, if adequate protection measures had been put in place, if the complexities of domestic violence had been better understood and addressed, she might still be alive today. Her death serves as a powerful reminder of the urgent need for reform in how we handle domestic violence cases. Kadesha Burch's story didn't end with her death. In the days, weeks, and months that followed her murder, her case became a catalyst for important conversations about domestic violence, victim protection, and systemic reform. The woman who had been failed by the system in life became a powerful voice for change in death. Her family, devastated by their loss, made the difficult decision to speak publicly about what had happened to Kadesha. They shared details about her life, her struggles with Davis, and her fight for justice, hoping that her story might prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. Their courage in speaking out during their time of grief helped ensure that Kadesha's death would have meaning beyond immediate tragedy. Domestic violence advocacy organizations embrace Kadesha's case as a teaching tool and a call to action. Her story illustrated so many of the problems they have been trying to address. The way victims are often criminalized for defending themselves, the lack of adequate protection during legal proceedings, and the deadly danger that victims face when trying to leave abusive relationships. Organizations use her case to push for legislative changes and increase funding for victim services. Legal professionals began using Kadesha's case in training programs to help law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and judges better understand complexities of domestic violence cases. Her story became a stark example of how well-intentioned legal processes can actually endanger the people they're meant to protect. Kadesha's case also sparked important conversations about the intersection of race, gender, and domestic violence. Many observers noted that as a black woman, Kadesha faced additional barriers in getting help and being believed by the system. Her story highlighted the need for culturally competent responses to domestic violence that take into account the unique challenges faced by women of color. The most important lesson from Kadesha's story is that domestic violence is not just a private matter between two people. It's a public safety issue that requires coordinated community response. Her case showed that when systems fail to work together effectively, the consequences can be deadly.
People in Washington County gathered tonight to honor a woman who was shot and killed inside her home last week. This is Wave News at 11. I'm Noelle Friel. Police say Roosevelt Davis III robbed a bank in Wisconsin and then traveled to Kentucky, where he shot and killed Kadesha Burch, also shooting and wounding her mother. Wave News reporter Fernando Garcia Francischini was at the candlelight vigil held in Burch's memory tonight. He joins us with how the community is remembering her.
This family is intermingled into my personal family.
Kadesha Burch was known by many in Springfield, and that was clear Sunday night when people from all over came together for a vigil in her memory. KSB says Burch was shot and killed inside a home on Claybrook Avenue on December 27th.
For those of us hearing Kadesha's story, the lessons are clear. We must do better. We must believe victims when they tell us they're in danger. We must ensure that the systems designed to protect them actually do so. We must recognize that domestic violence affects entire communities, not just individual families. Kadesha was more than just a victim of domestic violence. She was a devoted mother who worked at a daycare because she loved caring for children. She was an active member of her church community who showed up for others in their times of need. She was a woman who ran a small business to provide better opportunities for her family. She was someone who fought to protect herself when she felt her life was in danger, and someone who never stopped hoping for a better future for her children. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about how our society handles domestic violence. It shows us that the people we trust to protect victims can sometimes become the very systems that endanger them. It demonstrates that the moment when a victim tries to leave an abusive relationship is often the most dangerous time, yet it's also when they may receive the least protection. The man who killed Kadesha Roosevelt Davis III now faces the consequences of his actions. But no amount of punishment can bring back the life he took or heal the trauma he inflicted on her family and community. The real measure of justice for Kadesha will be whether her death leads to meaningful changes that protect other women in similar situations. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please know that help is available. The National Domestic Violence Hotline can be reached 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233, and they have resources available in multiple languages. Local organizations in your community may also provide services like emergency shelter, legal advocacy, and safety planning. We open with 3 names: Kadesha Burch, Jerriny Caples, and Krystal Evans. 3 women who should be alive today. Kadesha should be watching her 2 sons grow up in Kentucky. Jerriny should be celebrating her 29th birthday this year in Memphis. Krystal should have been free to rebuild her life after finally escaping her abusive marriage in Georgia. But here's what their deaths teach us. The system isn't broken by accident. It's broken by design. When a woman writes, "He's going to kill me," and authorities don't listen. When a mother defends herself and still becomes a target. When a killer can remain free for years while families wait for justice. This isn't about individual failures. This is about a system that treats domestic violence as a private matter instead of the public health crisis it truly is. Every 11 seconds, a woman is physically abused by an intimate partner in America. Every day, 3 women die from domestic violence. Kadesha, Jerriny, and Krystal were 3 of those women, but they don't have to be the last. Their stories end in tragedy, but our response to their stories, that's where change begins. We cannot bring them back, but we can honor their memory by demanding better protection, better policies, and better justice for the women who come after them. Their names were Kadesha Burch, Jerriny Caples, and Krystal Evans. Say their names, remember their stories, and fight for the change they died waiting for.